There was a time in the early 2000s where there were these animes that were heavily experimental and psychological. They were dense, dark, and trippy, and in my opinion, some of the best in the medium. They pushed the boundaries in terms of what an anime could be, or really what a story could be. A lot of them paid a pretty heavy price for their artistic endeavors and relentlessly unique identities. Many of them at the time of their release were kind of unfairly going under the radar. I've been seeing a lot of people more willing to discuss these types of anime and digging them up after a long time. Today we're going to be discussing Ergo Proxy, arguably a much more accessible anime than some of the other animes that it often gets lumped in with. The series was the brainchild of Shuko Murase and Dai Sato. Shuko ended up directing the series with his experience at Sunrise, and he apparently also designed the main characters in Final Fantasy IX. Dai Sato was the writer for the series, as he had a background that includes Cowboy Bebop, Ghost in the Shell, and Wolf's Rain. That's a pretty impressive pedigree. Ergo Proxy ended up being approached by Monglobe, or that one anime studio known for Samurai Champloo. They were given a lot of freedom for the project, and the rest was history. Episode 1 gives the viewer a lot to chew on, but it's still one of the best opening episodes I've ever seen to date. The world is immediately intriguing and holds a lot of mystery. A lot of that is thanks to the fantastic art direction. Ergo Proxy meshes sci-fi and religious inspiration in its architecture to great effect. It also ties into the themes of the story as well, but we'll get into that later. The setting is considered to be cyberpunk, but it's unlike any other version of cyberpunk you'll ever see. I, for one, am glad it's not yet another neon-drenched city. I like cyberpunk visuals as much as anybody, but sometimes I wish the genre would be open to exploring more visual styles. A lot of the environment itself is very plain and covered in white and shades of gray. You do see that in a lot of contemporary sci-fi, and on top of that, it's also very clean looking. A lot of the progenitors of the genre actually had a more dirty and gritty look like Blade Runner. This usually reflected the themes of cyberpunk itself, where everything in the societies might look really cool on the surface, but once you look past that, you see the dirt and misery of it all. Ergo Proxy doesn't forget this, with tons of buildings caked in a lot of rust and what I would assume is dirt. Ergo Proxy also generally sticks within the same mold of cyberpunk stories thematically, at least at the start. You have a typical, seemingly corrupt government and a so-called auto-reeve, which is akin to a replicant or android. They can also become conscious, and that's considered bad enough on its own right for them to be hunted down after the fact. Can you tell Japan really liked Blade Runner, by the way? I really like the designs for the auto reeves and all the machinery for that matter. They have this almost alien look to them, which makes them look more scary and threatening. My personal favorite is Iggy. He just looks so weird. The human cast also sport a very unique aesthetic, and especially our main character here. It's been memed to death at this point that Riel is literally just the front woman of Evanescence. According to Murase, Avril Lavigne and other gothic singers were inspirations. I don't think it's much of a stretch to say if they were aware of Avril Lavigne, then they were probably aware of Amy Lee. All the designs of the main characters are great because you pretty much get an idea of what they're like just by looking at them. Rawl is uptight and dominating, while a character like Vincent is frail and meek. The music in this show is also phenomenal, and that's just putting it lightly. It was composed by Yoshihiro Ike, and he throws a mix of electronic ambient music with haunting chants. One of the last tracks that plays in the episode that we'll be hearing is called The Pulse of the Awakening. It's one of the most memorable from the OST and features the chants Kyrie over and over again. It means Lord have mercy in Greek, I believe, and it showcases that even the music ties together thematically as well. So you got a great atmosphere, an interesting world, and a story that hooks you within minutes. What else could you ask for? So after getting felt up by a proxy at the end, episode 2 reveals more of the inherent flaws that come with living in Ramdo's domain. Even someone who's related to a high-ranking official cannot seep through the cracks. Riel is a pretty likable character. She's got a bit of an edge to her and can act harsh, but she isn't afraid to say what she thinks, and it's a shame that her character type is pretty rare for women in anime. Sure, there's some cliche sex appeal, but for the most part, she's a pretty strong and capable character. Unfortunately for her, she's a little too smart for her own good and ends up getting scolded by the collective. The collective probably raised some eyebrows for most people as they watch the show. There are a bunch of statues that are directly named after a bunch of famous philosophers. Beyond that, they don't really seem to hold any amount of significance. They do look cool, I guess, and they remind us that Ergo Proxy is a big brain show for big brain boys and girls, taking inspiration from all forms of high art. Obviously, Ergo Proxy is a very philosophical show, but I'm unsure if any philosophers mentioned here tie into the themes. Episode 2 also features one of the most infamous and brutal scenes in the entire show. When the proxy is giving chase to Vincent, it ends up destroying a bunch of citizens, including Rawls' wife and kid. It stings even worse knowing that his wife was just allowed to have one. Speaking of his wife, it was more subtly implied that she was Rawls' wife in the first episode instead of outright saying it. It shows how Ergo Proxy demands that you pay attention and it will not be holding your hand. Rawls' reaction to these events always fascinated me as he stares more at the proxy than his own wife. His wife and child's death end up playing into his downfall and affect him, but it shows how much at the beginning he prioritizes himself and his work above his own family. Pino has also been revealed to be infected with the Cogito virus. Cogito ergo sum is the cornerstone of the themes in Ergo Proxy. It's literally within the title of the anime as well. The phrase itself was used by Murase as he explains that everyone has another self inside themselves, like a double personality. I'm pretty sure he's pulling a bit from Freud here as well. The Cogito virus kind of acts like that and awakens the auto-reeves from their obedient selves to a more individualistic person. This obviously causes a problem for the people of Ramdo. I suppose in real life, people awakening and becoming their true selves is also often seen as dangerous, with society often trying to suppress individuality and the truth. Vincent will play a key role in fleshing out that theme. Episode 3, and we're already so close to finding out who was responsible for intruding on Riel's apartment. Except, I think it's pretty obvious at this point with all the hints leading up to the reveal of Vincent being the attacker. Up until now, he's been pretty unsuspicious, which makes him seem less obvious. But there was something a little bit off from the start considering how many aspects of him and his personality clash with Ramdo. He also has that one trope in anime where the character has their eyes shut for a considerable amount of time until shit hits the fan. Usually, I'm a bit annoyed by this trope, but it ties considerably well with the messages of different personalities and individuality. He is quite literally put into an awakened state now and can't look back. Pino is another character that now has started to embrace her individuality. This is immediately shown as she questions her own name when Vincent brings it up to her. This is also communicated visually with her bizarre pink fox getup. It is completely different from her normal set of clothes. She also takes on a more childish and inquisitive tone to her voice. Since both of them are on the run, naturally they pair up. Get used to these two because we're going to be seeing them for a long while. I have to admit, Pino can get on my nerves sometimes, especially in the upcoming episodes, but I suppose it makes sense why she acts the way she does. I guess she also is a nice contrast from the grim and bleak surroundings. Another important phrase that is uttered in this episode by the collective is raison d'etre, or the reason to exist, which is yet another core point of the series. Many of our characters are going to struggle to find their purposes, specifically after many of their ideals and their masks get torn away from them. Raul has his own raison d'etre questioned in this episode after the death of his wife and kid. You can also see him playing the piano that Pino used to play. Aside from her being a cogito infective autoreeve, I'd assume he might harbor some amount of disdain for her as he associates her with the loss of his family. Everyone here has something at stake and it's all tied to one person. When I initially watched Ergo Proxy, I thought we were going to spend the majority of the time in Ramdo, but in episode 4 onwards, it's mostly going to be taking place outside the dome. While Ramdo is an interesting place, the outside of the dome is actually far more fascinating and mysterious. On the surface, it looks like the most boring, bleak environment imaginable, but the people who reside beneath the dome are utterly captivating. They've left due to their own accord or someone else's. Many of them are also very afraid of moving away from the dome. They act far more human and warm than many of the characters that we've been introduced to. There's this dichotomy in their society of sorts. Many of them want to return to Ramdo while others seek freedom. There are multiple benefits and downside to living in both environments. It feels fully fleshed out despite the characters only being around for a handful of episodes. Hootie is one of my personal favorite characters in the series, and there are a great couple of episodes coming up. Now that most of our cast have their eyes open to what's going on behind closed doors, they now have no other option than to go down the painful path of truth and discovery. Episode 5 is my favorite because we continue to see how the people below Ramdo function. I say function in quotation marks because their society is on the verge of collapse, especially when Vincent is called into question. I find it ironic how the people escape a society to be free and rid themselves of Ramdo's lies, only to make a society based on lies. Hootie lies about everything to keep things functional and peaceful, because, like what Pino said in the last episode, happiness is lies. Everyone here lies, including to themselves. Most of the people here that clamored for freedom are more than willing to toss away that to be safe and secure once again. Freedom is ultimately something that has a hefty price tag attached to it. Many people claim that they may want such a thing, only to realize that it can cost everything. Hootie's situation fully demonstrates how difficult it would be to live your life if you actually did tell the truth to everyone. People would hate you, and I don't think you could even have a functional society if you ran solely based on truth. So much of our existences in general hinge on self-deception to keep functioning. Aside from that, Pino had some interesting interactions with the people down below. As an autoreeve, she's been made to imitate people, even more so as a companion model. She was even showed recreating Timothy's picture exactly the same way. Timothy tells her to do something original, which is not something that she's been programmed to do, obviously. Autoreeves are another way this show tries to show how people's individuality can form. Is it something that's innate to us, or is it something that we are morphed into? Usually, I'm a bit tired of seeing this existentialist theme in cyberpunk. It's been done to absolute death, but the way it's presented in Pino's case is way deeper than other cyberpunk stories. It's literally like watching a child develop their personality. Well, now we've made it to episode 6, and I should probably talk about the opening and ending songs. Both of them are great songs in their own right, but I really like the way the opening is edited. It feels like there's a slew of early 2000s aesthetic where it has a bunch of scrawling, cryptic text that's overlaid on footage. I've always really enjoyed that look. I'm not sure if there's a name for it, but it's really cool. At this point, a lot of viewers are probably surprised that Riel is kind of taking the backseat to the plot. They did debate during production over whether Vincent or Riel would be the leading role, so what ends up happening is a split narrative between the two, which allows for both of them to be fleshed out nicely. I always forget coming back to Ergo Proxy just how dark it actually is. For some reason, the show doesn't depress me nearly as much as something like Techno Lies, but the ending of this episode is just crushing. The entire group gets wiped out in seconds in such a brutal fashion. Heads get blown off, and others drown, and even Quinn dies. Hoodie also perishes, and it's such a tragic death for a seemingly well-meaning guy. I love the little character detail of him keeping the toy soldier after all those years out of Ramdo and taking it back to the dome with him. God, the writing in the show is so good. I'd imagine in another anime, Hoodie would be a throwaway character, but not here. I don't really have that much to comment on for episode 7, but the collective are really annoying, man. It's no wonder why Rawl ends up breaking mentally. We also learn more about Ramdo in terms of how humans are produced and info about the proxies. I know she says that the truth isn't going to bring her happiness, but Riel, in all seriousness, is taking things pretty well considering the fact that she's seen a lot of stuff at this point. Not much time is really shown with her in despair, but I guess she's a pretty stoic woman. I would probably be spiraling out of control like a Lovecraft protagonist at this point. She also gets to reunite with Iggy, which is always a good thing. I just realized watching this episode that these two kind of have a similar dynamic as Vincent and Pino. In a sense, the human characters are serious while the Otto Reeves are more comedic and supporting. It's kind of like the reverse situation where Iggy is trying to look after Riel while Vincent is the one looking after Pino. Episode 8 is so good. I love the story of this episode even though it does sort of take the backseat to the action, as this is the most action-packed episode in the series. So, as Vincent runs out of supplies, he ends up running into another dome. This one's known as Haros, and it's so much cooler than Ramdo. It's kind of like a big prison, and I just find it hard not to be taken in by how different each dome is. They all have their own unique identity and societies. It almost reminds me of the vaults from Fallout. Karos kind of also reminds me of Tsutomu Nihei's manga Blame, especially in the shots where all the floors are shown. The setup for Haros is so cool with people having to fight off the Otto Reeves, as they also appear as knights. It's such a mysterious and cool concept. On top of that, we also get another proxy revealed as she goes around killing a lot of the people in there. And yes, I said she, and why is she so? Now that it's been properly revealed that Vincent is the proxy, in case you haven't picked up on that fact, we get to see how an actual fight works between them. The cinematography during this episode is also brilliant here. and is for the episode, as a matter of fact. He ends up killing it by doing some kind of eye lightning clash with her. I'm not really sure what the thought process behind it is, but it's kind of cool. You also notice there's a lot of references to cards in this episode. In the beginning, it shows the card knights in a picture book that presumably Pino has been reading. Just like a lot of things in Ergo Proxy, this has a lot of symbolism tied to it. I think it fits in within the themes of fate of Ergo Proxy. The cards are as if everything is already kind of played out. The mysterious figure at the end of the episode also ends up holding up a card that's the Joker card. If we look at it, it also has a similar appearance to Vincent. The Joker card is commonly seen as chaotic and unpredictable. It's pretty obvious how that seems to link with Vincent's character. He says in the episode that bloodshed follows him everywhere he goes. It's like a stack of dominoes falling in succession, or in this case, a stack of cards, which causes everything to change around him. I wish we really spent more time in Haros, but in episode 9 we get to meet Kazak's Hauer. Down Bad doesn't even begin to describe this man. He's completely lost his mind now that Vincent kinda sorta killed his love interest in the last episode. Nice going, Vince. It's interesting to me to see how Pino sees past Kazak's before Vincent. It's implied that she probably sees the Knights before Vince does, but considering she also has the mind of a child and probably sees things in a blunt manner, she's probably put off by Kazak's for other reasons. I find Kazak's point of view on the Autoreivs to be thought-provoking. The Knights, as he so puts it, are trying to find their own meaning through destruction itself. He states that there is meaning in destruction. Although it kind of sounds like some kind of line that a nihilistic shonen villain would say, he kind of has a point. Not saying that the violence he does is justified, but in other situations, breaking things down can often reveal painful truths that is part of growing. That's pretty much what he is trying to do to Vincent in this episode by beating the memories out of him, to get him to remember who he really is, aside from getting revenge for killing Senex. This fight scene between the two is burned into my mind, if you will. It's really epic. The show is going to be taking a pretty big departure from what most think the rest of the show would be like. Episode 10, we're finally in the double digits, and oh, that's interesting. So, like I said, this show is going to bring up the term raison d'etre a lot. I mean, I think it literally directly states it 3 times in this episode, as well as I think therefore I am. This episode is all about exploring the character's reason to exist. We do get to spend some time with Raul here, and it's pretty much the same as usual for him, getting scolded by the collective and meddling in things as he shouldn't. However, this episode marks where there's a drastic change in his character. Before, there were a lot of things that were off about his character. Well, there's something off with a lot of the cast. But now he's going a step further. He ends up developing a pretty uncomfortable relationship with Daedalus. I think Raul turning face is a point of confusion for many viewers, but I think it's important to understand what he's going through. His wife and child died recently, and he constantly just keeps getting bullied and threatened by the collective. He's becoming more and more disillusioned with the world as time passes. They even say that he could have ended up like Riel in this episode. He also has a considerably large ego, and seemingly views himself above Ramdo. A lot of his character takes inspiration from Nietzschean philosophy as well, specifically his work Beyond Good and Evil. The other half of this episode takes place in a nuke town, a kind of abandoned area where Riel has been recovering. She has a dream where she meets a girl that looks similar to herself. This is another way of reinforcing her raison d'etre and combing through the events thus far. I honestly don't feel like this part is entirely necessary because I think the viewer understands her reasoning thus far. It does provide a pretty cool scene where it's implied that the Autoreivs living there start abandoning their programs too. Episode 11 is really weird. I remember never really caring for this episode that much, at least in previous viewings. Not necessarily because it's philosophical, although that would probably bore a lot of viewers, but I've always felt like it was a bit filler-esque. I mean, this is the second episode where we get Vincent having to face himself once again. I really think that episode 9 would have been a fine place to let that plot point die. It worked perfectly fine with the last scene of Vincent arising from the flames of combat, but that doesn't really fit in with the plot's themes, as it shows how hard it is to accept harsh truths about ourselves. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of cool symbolism and interesting philosophical discussion in this episode, but it really slows down the pace in Ergo Proxy. In fact, the show's pacing quality hits quite a dip from this point onward. Episode 12 sees us taking a literal pit stop and gives us time to see development between Riel and Vincent. There's not much really going on outside of that. We do get more of an idea of what lies outside of the dome though. Another thing I guess I could comment on is the usage of CGI in Ergo Proxy. You might have noticed that a lot of the machines themselves are largely CGI based. Considering this is an early 2000s anime, I guess the CGI isn't the worst thing in the world. It's used sparingly to the point that it's not particularly offensive, although it is incredibly depressing that CGI utilized in anime hasn't really progressed that much in recent year. I'm looking at you, Berserk 2016, and the recent Fist of the North Star anime, and Dorohedoro. In episode 13, Iggy gets infected with the Cogito virus. Actually, he's had it since the attack on Daedalus Lab. The Cogito virus hasn't really been explained much in the anime thus far, but it affects every Autoreeve differently. The virus acts like a truth serum of sorts, where the Autoreeves drop their daily mask and start to don their true personas. Interestingly enough, some of them stay loyal to their quote-unquote masters after the fact. Iggy's case is that he does remain loyal to Riel, albeit in a very twisted form of loyalty. In comparison, the knights from episode 9 also still seem to have some level of loyalty to Kha'Zix and Senex. You can't say that all Autoreeves are inherently disloyal to their owners. The ones that have been shown as violent outside of the ones attacked in the lab are in the process of fleeing from being chased down. It's really tragic to see Iggy dealing with the virus. It progresses rapidly in this episode, and the language that he uses becomes less and less formal. He even swears, "Iggy, how could you?" It's genuinely shocking that he ends up dying here, but I suppose it would be easier to develop 3 characters in the group than 4. Episode 14 is yet another trippy episode that tackles the core philosophy of the show. This might sound strange, but this dome reminds me of The Shining for some reason. The big, empty, open areas invoke that same feeling of paranoia. There's also a segment where Riel gets locked inside a storage room like Jack does in The Shining. This upward angle looks eerily reminiscent of that part too. Once again, we are exploring the split personalities that people often have. Vincent's already been properly explored onto this point, but Riel also has her own doppelganger in this episode. Thankfully, we don't get 2 Pinots because one's bad enough. I kid. But the proxy of this episode is really cool. We don't really get to see what it looks like because it can shift into other people. This is so surreal too because the environment doesn't really look futuristic at all. It looks really similar to our world, actually. It makes you wonder how and when this place started to die off. The title mentions the name of Ophelia, which is one of the characters in Hamlet who just so happens to die by drowning. Riel ends up almost drowning in the lake as well. Ergo Proxy has a lot of these ties to certain cultures and stories. I've seen some people call this anime pretentious for this. Sure, the show can be up its own ass at times, but generally it's way deeper than an average anime by leaps and bounds. I think the fact that I've discussed the show for this long and its depth speaks volume to that. Out of all the things that you would expect from this series, a game show is not really one of them, but episode 15 does just that. It's a pretty fun episode, I guess, but wow, this is out of nowhere. We went from facing uncomfortable truths about ourselves to a game of Jeopardy! I believe the host is voiced by Kenta Miyake, who did the voice for Abdul and JoJo, and he does an amazing job as the host. You can tell he was having a pretty good time recording it. There really isn't too much outside of that in this episode. It does fill us in on how the Earth got to this state, and that's about it. There's something really mysterious about this episode though, with how the characters got into this situation being left unknown. It's actually being broadcast around the Earth, I guess, because even Ramdo is picking it up as well. I'd like to see Raul on some kind of show like this and see how he'd take it. Of course, this isn't a regular happy game show because whoever loses ends up dying. It's Ergo Proxy. You can't be happy watching Ergo Proxy, you know? Episode 16, or Busy Doing Nothing. It's exactly what the title of the episode says. In fact, you could skip the whole episode and miss nothing. It's really not an offensive episode, but I hated it on my first viewings. Particularly because there's already a pacing problem in Ergo Proxy, and then they drop a slice of life episode right after the game show parody. It felt like my time was being insulted. I've even dropped on this episode sometimes when I was rewatching it. I found out though that a lot of people really like this episode, and I can see why. In episode 17, we finally progress the plot. It immediately grabs your attention with Raul on the run trying to avoid the auto reeves. I also wanted to point out that Ergo Proxy has kind of been cutting to the chase. They haven't really been showing too much context in the previous episodes of how our characters end up where they are or how they get out of it. I kind of like this because showing how they enter each dome and exit the place would probably get kind of annoying. You pretty much got the idea was like after Haros. At first, I thought that was kind of jarring, but I can see why they did it. Thankfully, we do get more backstory on why Raul has betrayed Ramdo. After the satellite broadcast, he begins to question his own raison d'etre. Despite his high-ranking position, he is nothing more than a high-ranking cog. That means when he serves his purpose, he's done for. The collective mentioned that no one remains as the Security Bureau director for very long. They end up knowing too much and end up getting replaced. That raises a lot of questions though. It probably would be a lot less of a hassle to replace it as an auto reeve, but there's a risk that they might get Cogito. But then the collective are also revealed to be auto reeves themselves. It's also a little dumb that they keep reinstalling a director if they end up like that. I suppose it shows how corrupt and meaningless a lot of the lives of the citizens of Ramdo are. They even acknowledge the irony of his position. At least Raul finds a new raison d'etre in the form of Pino. It's implied that he might have felt a little bit more affection to her than he does. In the game show episode, it shows him intensively staring at Pino when she's on the screen. The ending also mirrors one of the earlier episodes where he slams down the piano. Now he's actually playing it, and it shows how much he's changed. Episode 18 is when our characters finally reach Mosque. although it's a bit underwhelming because we don't get any answers. We do get this cool looking mushroom headed guy, and he's cool, I guess. It's not really anticlimactic. I don't know what anybody else would come to expect at this point in time. What probably wasn't expected was the revelation that Mosk was destroyed by Ramdo. Speaking of Ramdo, Raul finally gives a very impassioned speech that would make Nietzsche very proud of him. It's really nice to see someone talk back to the collective, but somehow they spare him and trust him with his plans. It feels kind of like an ass pull, especially considering they didn't do the same with the other Security Bureau directors. There's also a clone of sorts of Riel wandering around. Daedalus has always been creepy with Riel because she's his reason to exist, but this is another level of creepiness. It's a really tragic case of how sometimes our drive to chase meaning in our lives can often lead to more problems. Episode 19 is one of my personal favorite episodes. It's an incredibly charming and fun ride. I don't know why, but mixing childhood aesthetics with dark psychological themes is such a good combination. They both kind of balance each other out in a way that on paper shouldn't really work. But what I do appreciate about Ergo Proxy's later episodes is that they try to do something different. For about the first half of the show, it looks like it's going to be pretty straightforward, but it quickly pulls the viewer out of the rug for something that's more sophisticated. So on the surface, Smile Land seems like a pretty nice place to live, but then you find out it's kind of a metaphor for society as a whole. Will Be Good keeps the masses happy by keeping them ignorant. Smile World is a utopia only because it's kept away. So in a sense, the people there have fake smiles. This is also another way to demonstrate how society shoves happiness or toxic positivity down our throats. Society at many points in times demands that you look the other way and be happy about it. As many of the characters in the show have stated, the truth doesn't bring happiness. Will Be Good even demands that Pino not tell Vince, lest the entire society will end up crumbling. It's a really lighthearted episode before a bunch of mentally taxing episodes to come up. It's been well established at this point that proxies can attack and come after Vincent in a variety of ways. In episode 20, the proxy Swan is fighting Vincent through a form of a dream. It makes it seem like it's the final episode, but it makes for a nice bait and switch. I knew something was off from the moment that Raul was getting scolded again before Swan was even introduced. It wouldn't make any sense for him to get screamed at after by the collective after they just let him go. It's an interesting what-if situation that kind of reminds me of how Evangelion played with its viewers' expectations in the last couple of episodes. It's an interesting setup where Riel has a sort of personality disorder that laps into Vincent from time to time. The dual personality concept is well embedded in this episode, but talk about a bad therapist though. Episode 21, things get pretty complicated from here on out, but that's to be expected. Everyone knows the rules of last episodes in anime. So, Ramdo is pretty much fucked. The Otto Reeves are fully at war with the citizens, and Vincent's gone missing. The scenery of this episode is harrowing. There's one part where Riel visits the physician, and he's still acting like he's working while surrounded by broken glass. Even though the world around him is crumbling, he clings to his way of life. I feel bad for this character that showed up for only a small amount of time in the show. There's a lot of cryptic dialogue towards the end of the episode where the collective refers to Vincent as the creator. If you remember me mentioning Gnosticism, that's where this is going to be showing up in the last couple of episodes. If you're not familiar with Gnosticism, like I was before Ergo Proxy, it's a concept that many religions follow based around a perfect being. There's also a corrupted demiurge responsible for making material world evil. The only way to seek salvation is to obtain knowledge about this perfect being. It's also where we get the name Monad, which basically is God within the Gnostic system. Initially, neither the creators of Ergo Proxy wanted to even touch Gnosticism, but it ended up fitting in the themes of the story. Episode 22 has both heartwarming and heartbreaking moments, mostly heartbreaking. I'll start with the Riel clone. So even though Daedalus has made a copy of Riel for his own purposes, she's still interested in Vincent overall. Essentially, nothing has changed about this copy. Her raison d'etre still ties back to Vincent, which makes Daedalus pretty jealous here. This is probably due to the fact that she is a copy of Monad. His hands even grip the clones while washing them after she mentions Vincent. Honestly, I'm having a very hard time liking Daedalus in this episode. His own selfishness is essentially going to be his doom. I hate to bring the comparison up a lot, but I feel like there's a hint of Devilman in this final episode. The apocalyptic setting where everyone's turning on each other, while a deity moves throughout all of the destruction with benevolence. It rings a bell to me. Then we go to Rawl's death, and it's so utterly heartbreaking. The last time we saw Pino draw pictures, she was copying other people, but in this episode, we can see she finally draws something of her own, and it's her papa, or Rawl. Rawl ends up dying a very lonely and borderline pitiful death. It's so ironic that he ends up being killed by an auto-reeve of all things, considering he was probably responsible for many of their deaths. It's so tragic on so many levels. He wasn't a great guy some of the time, but he was one of my personal favorite characters. Here we go, the final episode. Surprisingly, it ends on a pretty hopeful note. You know, outside of all the people in Ramdo probably getting crushed to death. I honestly had a big shit-eating grin on my face the whole time when watching this episode. There's such a fuck yeah kind of feeling at the end here. It's just a very satisfying conclusion to the series. Vincent even stands upon the wreckage of Ramdo while giving some cheesy speech like he's Batman or something. I do feel like some things could have been a bit better explained towards the end here, but it's still a really good ending. I'm really glad that Ergo Proxy exists. It's a series entirely unique to itself, and it's a breath of fresh air. After doing a comprehensive deep dive in its themes, they've resonated with me a lot more. The best kind of artwork, in my opinion, is not the kind that covers up harsh reality, but breaks it down. And that's what Ergo Proxy is all about. Regardless of whether or not it makes us happy, we should move forward and face reality. If we do that, then maybe we can have some possibility of fixing its problems. Ergo Proxy is an important and essential anime for that reasons and many more. Before I end this video, I wanted to share the fact that there's also a manga of Ergo Proxy as well. I don't think people really know this, but I might cover it in another video if this does well. Anyways, thanks for watching.